The mud on her boots was still wet when she knocked on the servants' entrance of Thornwell Hall, the house that had been her father's, and his father's with him, and which now, by a document she had never been permitted to read, belonged entirely to her uncle. She had introduced herself as Vera, not Verity Ashcroft, which was the name on her baptismal record, and in the parish register, and in the margins of every book her father had ever given her. Just Vera. Vera who had come about the housemaid position. Vera who had references from a family in Harrogate, which was true enough, since she had spent 4 months there, learning what it looked like to be someone no one would think twice about. The cook, a stout woman named Mrs. Baines, had looked her over with the efficiency of someone who had hired and dismissed a great many Veras in her time. "You're thinner than I'd like," Mrs. Baines had said, "but your hands look capable. That would do." Thornwell Hall was not what Verity had expected. She had been away for 3 years, first to her aunt's house in the West after her father's death, then to Harrogate, then to the weeks of careful planning that had felt, in her lowest moments, like the only thing keeping her upright. She had expected the house to feel different under her uncle's management, neglected perhaps, or altered past recognition. It looked exactly the same. That was almost worse. The same stone, the same long windows catching the morning light, the same oak in the east garden that had been struck by lightning when she was 7, and had survived it, listing slightly but intact. The house had not noticed that anything had changed. Only she had. She was given a room in the servants' wing, with a narrow window and a chest of drawers that stuck. She learned the rhythms of the place with the focused attention of someone who had once known them from the other side. The front parlor received callers on Tuesdays. Her uncle preferred his eggs soft, which the cook knew and accommodated without being asked. The East Gallery was kept locked since her father's death, which Mrs. Baines mentioned only once and then did not mention again, in the manner of someone who understood that some subjects were cleaner when left alone. Verity did not ask about the gallery. She added it to the list of things she was keeping. Her uncle, Sir Aldous Crestmere, appeared on her 3rd morning. She was carrying a tray through the main corridor when he came around the corner, and she stepped aside and looked at the middle distance as she had learned to do, making herself precisely as visible as a housemaid ought to be, and no more. He did not look at her. That was the thing about her uncle. He had a talent for not looking at things that did not immediately serve him. He walked past with the particular purposefulness of a man going somewhere important, and Verity carried her tray and did not watch him go, and let her hands be very still on the handles, because some feelings, when they were this specific, could not afford to be felt all the way through. She had been in the house for 11 days when the letter arrived. It came addressed to Sir Aldous, which told her nothing, except that the sender was someone who wrote in a precise, unhurried hand, the kind of hand that came from having learned early and practiced long. She saw it on the hall table only because she was dusting the hall table, and she saw the return seal only because she had learned, in the past 11 days, to look at everything in Thornwell Hall with the attention her uncle applied to nothing. The seal was a falcon, black wax, the Ashford device, which meant the Duke of Ashford, which meant the man who held the neighboring estate, and whose name she had grown up hearing in the way that one grew up hearing about weather. Present, significant, not always convenient. She had never met him. She knew of him the way you knew of things at a distance. He had inherited young, managed well, appeared in the county records with the regularity of someone who took the administrative aspects of his position seriously. He was not known for visits. She set the letter back on the table. She finished dusting the hall. She did not think about the falcon seal again until the following Thursday, when the Duke of Ashford arrived in person. He came without announcement, which caused considerable disruption in the kitchen and no visible disruption in himself. He was tall and dark-coated and moved with the economy of someone who had decided a long time ago how he intended to occupy space and had not revisited the decision. Mrs. Baines sent for the parlor to be prepared and for tea to be brought, and for Verity, specifically, to bring it. She was aware, carrying the tray down the corridor, that this was the kind of moment that could go several ways. She had not planned for it. She had not planned for most of what had happened in the past 11 days, having learned that Thornwell Hall did not cooperate with plans so much as it presented situations and waited to see what you did with them. She knocked. She entered. She set the tray on the table by the window and began to pour with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing this for years rather than weeks. She did not look at either man directly, which was correct, and which also meant she was looking at neither man incorrectly, which was something she needed. Her uncle was speaking. The usual pleasantries, the usual performance of welcome from a man who was not especially glad to see anyone but understood the social mechanics of appearing to be. The Duke said very little. She had poured the first cup and was reaching for the second when she heard him stop. The silence was complete. She looked up because you looked up when a room went that quiet. He was not looking at her uncle. He was looking at her hands, at her right hand specifically, where the signet ring had been until 3 years ago. Her father's ring, given to her on her 18th birthday, because he had no sons and had never pretended otherwise. She did not wear it now. She had not worn it since the morning after the funeral, when her uncle's solicitor had appeared with a list of effects to be accounted for, and she had understood with the clarity of someone who had just learned how fast things could change that some things needed to be kept where they could not be found. But the ring had left a mark. 3 years of wearing it, and the pale band of skin where it had sat was still faintly visible, still distinct from the rest of her hand, in the way that things leave impressions on you whether you intend them to or not. She completed pouring the second cup. She straightened. She looked at the middle distance. "Thank you," the Duke said. His voice was quiet, not cold, contained, the voice of someone accustomed to rooms where he did not need to raise it. She left. She was 2 corridors away before she let herself breathe properly. He stayed for an hour. She knew because Mrs. Baines tracked these things with the accuracy of a woman whose management of the household depended on knowing when callers would need refreshment and when they would not. Verity spent the hour in the kitchen courtyard doing something that did not require her full attention, which turned out to be folding linens, which was useful because her hands needed something to do. What she was doing in her mind was less orderly. She was thinking about what a man who had arrived without announcement and said almost nothing and had gone very still when he saw the mark of a ring on a housemaid's hand was doing in her father's house. She was thinking about the falcon seal and the precise handwriting, and the fact that her uncle had not told anyone a letter had arrived. She was thinking about the East Gallery, still locked. She added the Duke of Ashford to the list of things she was keeping. He did not return that day, or the next. She almost convinced herself she had imagined the stillness, that it had been something else, some coincidence of timing, a man pausing in his sentence for no particular reason. On the 4th day after his visit, she found the housekeeper in the corridor outside the locked gallery. Mrs. Dent was a spare, gray woman of 50 who had been at Thornwell Hall for longer than Verity had been alive, and who moved through it with the quiet authority of someone who considered herself a custodian rather than an employee. She had been, Verity had gathered, deeply loyal to Verity's father. She had not shown any recognition of Verity. Verity was not entirely sure whether that meant Mrs. Dent did not recognize her, or that she did and had decided not to say so, which were very different things with very different implications. Mrs. Dent was standing outside the gallery with a ring of keys and an expression that said she was not inviting questions. Verity carried her basket past and said nothing. That evening, the key ring was on the hook by the kitchen door where it always was, and Verity did not look at it as she passed, and she was asleep before 10 o'clock and dreaming of her father's study and the particular smell of it, which was pipe tobacco and old books and the wax he used on his desk. And she woke at 5 in the dark with her hands already still, which meant some part of her had made a decision before the rest of her had caught up. She waited until the house was quiet again the following night. The gallery key was the third on the ring. She had noted that. She had noted which keys went where in the 11 days before she had noted almost anything else, because information of that kind was the kind that would matter later, and later had a way of arriving before you expected. The gallery was dark. She carried a single candle. She was not reckless about it. It was not a large room. Her father had used it for things he valued and wanted near him. Paintings, mostly, a few cases of books, a writing desk he had used in his early years. The paintings were covered, all of them, white sheeting over the frames in a way that suggested they had been covered after the funeral and not uncovered since. Verity set the candle on the desk and began at the nearest frame. The first 4 were landscapes. She had grown up with them. She recognized them without particular feeling. The 5th was a portrait, and she stopped. It was her grandmother. She was certain of it, not because she had seen this painting before. She had not known it existed, but because she had seen photographs, had heard descriptions, had been told often enough that she had her grandmother's eyes and her grandmother's jaw for the information to have settled into something she could measure. The woman in the portrait was perhaps 40, dark-haired, with a directness in the gaze that portraits of that era rarely captured, and which Verity recognized in herself the way you recognized things you hadn't been taught but had always known. There was a small brass plate on the frame. She leaned close. Constance Ashcroft, 1871, her grandmother, her father's mother, here in a locked room, in a house that had been made to forget her. Verity stood in the gallery with her candle and looked at a woman with her own eyes and understood why the gallery was locked. She was replacing the sheet when she heard the floor creak behind her. She turned. Mrs. Dent stood in the doorway. She had a lamp and no particular expression, and the look of someone who had been expecting this, or something like it, for longer than she had been expecting the specific moment. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "I knew you the first day," Mrs. Dent said finally. "Your hands. You carry a tray the way your father carried a book, like it's worth something." Verity looked at her. "I didn't know if you did." "I did," Mrs. Dent said. "I wasn't sure what you were doing here, or whether saying so would help or harm you." She looked at the covered portrait. He had it locked after the reading of the will. Said it was clutter. Her expression did not change, but something behind it did. Your father was not a man who kept clutter. "No," Verity agreed. "There is something you should know," Mrs. Dent said. She crossed to the writing desk, opened the bottom drawer, and produced a folder, old leather, the kind that had been someone's working document case and had been retired to the drawer and left there. She held it out. "The Duke of Ashford sent a man here 6 weeks ago. Not a formal visit. A young man with no card and no name given who said he was inquiring on behalf of a private party about the estate records. Sir Aldous turned him away. He came back, and the second time he came to me." Verity took the folder. It contained a letter, 1 page, in the same precise handwriting she had seen on the envelope in the hall. It was addressed to Mrs. Dent, and it was signed W. Ashford, Duke of Ashford, and it said, in language that was direct, without being reckless, that the Duke had reason to believe the disposition of the Ashcroft estate following Sir Edmund Ashcroft's death had not proceeded as intended, and that he was making discreet inquiry into the matter before taking any formal steps, and that if Mrs. Dent was in a position to confirm or deny certain facts regarding the existence of a surviving heir. He would be grateful for her confidence. Verity read it twice. "He knows something," she said. "He knows someone," Mrs. Dent said. "He hasn't said how much. But a man doesn't send a letter like that in his own name unless he's decided he's prepared to stand behind it." Verity looked at the candle. The wax had run a little while she'd been reading. She righted it and thought about a man who had stood in her father's parlor and gone very still at the sight of a mark on her hand. Why would the Duke of Ashford concern himself with this? She said, not skeptically, genuinely. She wanted to understand the shape of it. Mrs. Dent was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone choosing between two truths and deciding both were necessary. "Your father and his father were friends," she said. "The old Duke. Not business, friends, the kind made young enough that they outlasted most things. They fell out of correspondence later. It happens. But your father spoke of the Ashford family as people worth trusting. And I believe," she added, "though I cannot prove it, that the current Duke knows that. That whatever his father said or left behind said something about who Edmund Ashcroft was and who his family was." Verity folded the letter carefully and put it back in the folder. She looked at the portrait of her grandmother. "She should not have been locked away," she said. "No," Mrs. Dent said. "She should not." Verity returned the folder to the drawer and the key to the ring and herself to her narrow room before 4 in the morning, and she lay on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling and thought for a very long time. Not about what to do. She had known what she intended from the beginning. Had known it with the cold clarity of someone who has had 3 years and considerable anger to arrive at a plan. But about the shape of things now, about the fact that there was a man in the neighboring estate who had been making quiet inquiries about the Ashcroft succession, and who had gone still at the sight of her hand, and who had written a careful letter to a housekeeper rather than a formal one to a solicitor, which was the choice of someone who understood that formal channels could be obstructed, and had decided to find a different way through. She was not sure what to do with that. She had not planned for help. She had planned for everything else. She decided to think about it in the morning, and then she didn't sleep, and so she thought about it in the dark instead. The Duke came back on a Wednesday. This time he sent a card ahead, which was the correct way to do it, and Sir Aldous received him in the study. Verity was not summoned. She went about her work and did not put herself in the path of either man, and spent the morning in the linen room, which had the advantage of being directly above the study. She did not intend to listen. She was folding sheets. The voices were indistinct, mostly. She caught the shape rather than the content. Her uncle's voice had its particular flat quality, the register of a man who was managing rather than conversing. The Duke's voice was quieter. She could not make out words. She made out the rhythm of it, the unhurried patience of someone who was asking questions he already had partial answers to and was waiting to see what the other person filled in. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. She heard the door below, and then the sounds of departure, and then her uncle's footsteps going the other direction, not toward her, which was what mattered. She was still in the linen room when Mrs. Dent appeared in the doorway. "He asked about you," Mrs. Dent said without preamble. Not by name. He asked whether the household staff was the usual complement, whether there had been recent additions. Sir Aldous said no. The Duke said he understood and thanked him and left. Verity set down the sheet she was holding. "He knows I'm here," she said. Mrs. Dent's expression was not quite neutral. "He suspects something," she said. "He is too careful a man to say what he suspects until he knows it." Verity looked at the window. It was raining, the particular gray English rain that made everything look like a different, quieter version of itself. "Is there a way to speak with him?" she said, "without my uncle knowing?" A pause. "There is a lane," Mrs. Dent said, "at the back of the east garden. It runs to the boundary wall and continues to the Ashford property. The gate at the wall has been unlocked since your father's time." She looked at Verity with the expression she had worn in the gallery, that thing that was not quite approval but contained it. "His Grace rides in the East Fields on Thursday mornings. Early." She left. Verity looked at the rain. The following morning was not raining. It was cold, the specific cold of late autumn that had decided to be honest about what was coming, and Verity wore her good coat over her housemaid's dress, and walked the lane in the dark before 6, and stood at the gate in the wall and waited. He arrived at 1:15. He was alone, no groom, which she thought was deliberate. He saw her when he was 20 yards off, and he stopped his horse and looked at her with the expression she had seen in the parlor. That assessing, patient attention that had no performance in it, and which she had been thinking about, unwillingly, for 2 weeks. He dismounted without speaking. He came to the gate and stopped on his side of it, which she appreciated. He was giving her the wall between them. He understood that she needed it. "You are not a housemaid," he said. "Not a question." "I was for the past 3 weeks." She held his gaze. "Before that I was Verity Ashcroft, Sir Edmund Ashcroft's daughter." Something crossed his face. He had been moving toward this conclusion, she could see that, had been placing pieces for weeks, but confirmation was its own thing, separate from the expectation of it. "Your father's will," he said, "was not the document my uncle submitted for probate." Yes, she had practiced saying this without her voice doing anything complicated. She had gotten fairly good at it. "There is a copy of the original. My father gave it to his solicitor. That solicitor retired 2 years ago, to his daughter's house in Bristol. I have been unable to reach him through normal correspondence because the correspondence has been going through Thornwell Hall, and my uncle manages Thornwell Hall's post." He was looking at her with the careful attention of a man learning something at speed and organizing it as it arrived. "What was in the original?" he said. She told him. Not everything at once. She had learned, in 3 years, that giving everything at once was a way of losing the shape of it. She told him in the order that mattered. The trust her father had established. The provision that Thornwell Hall was to be held for her until her marriage or her 25th birthday. The appointment of the Ashford family as her formal protectors in the event that her father's brother should contest the will, which her father had apparently anticipated, with the accuracy of a man who had known his brother for 50 years. "The Ashford family," the Duke said. "Your father," she said. "He and my father were friends. You knew that, I think. I knew they had corresponded." He looked past her at the lane, then back. "My father died when I was 16. I went through his papers properly only 2 years ago. I found the correspondence. He stopped. "I found other things that suggested the Ashcroft succession deserved a closer look." "What other things?" He was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of a man deciding how much to give and in what order. "A letter," he said finally, "from your father. Written in the last year of his life. He mentioned you. He was precise about you. About who you were and what he expected for you and why he trusted mine with the knowledge of it." He paused. "He called you his best argument against the idea that things cannot be properly arranged." She looked at the wall between them. She had not known that. Had not known what her father had said to other people about her, had only known what he had said to her, which had been plenty, but this was different. This was her father in private, her father without her in the room, and the particular thing it was to find out what someone said about you, when you were not there to hear it. She pressed her fingers briefly against the cold stone of the wall. "What do you need from me?" she said. Her voice was level. She was proud of that. He looked at her directly. "My solicitor," he said. "I would like to bring him here, not through your uncle, to Mrs. Dent directly, with your knowledge and your consent. There are things that can be done through the appropriate channels when the appropriate channels are provided with the correct information. And my uncle will be notified at the correct moment, he said, by the correct people, in the correct way. He said it without drama. The way people said things they had already arranged in their minds and were simply now reporting. She looked at him across the wall. He looked back. The morning was very still. The east fields of the Ashford estate were visible behind him, pale with frost. "You've been working on this for 2 years, she said. He considered it. More or less. Since I found the letters, without knowing whether I was alive. Yes, she absorbed that. A man who had spent 2 years untangling the legal situation surrounding an heir he had not been able to locate and did not know was concealed in the neighboring household carrying a tray. Why? She said, not accusingly, genuinely. For the same reason she had asked about the gallery, because she needed to understand the shape of the thing. He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that was not evasion but preparation. Your father trusted mine, he said, and mine trusted yours. When I found the letters, I understood that I had inherited something that wasn't in the estate accounts. He met her eyes. I don't discard things like that. She looked at the frost on the fields. Neither did my father, she said. No, he said. I gathered. She straightened. She had been in the cold for 20 minutes, and there was breakfast to begin and a household to not alert. I'll speak to Mrs. Dent today, she said. When can your solicitor come? Thursday next, if you agree. She nodded. She stepped back from the gate. Then something made her stop. Not sentiment exactly, but something that needed saying because it was accurate, and she had been, for 3 years, saving accurate things for when they could be heard. There is a portrait of my grandmother, she said, in the locked gallery. My uncle covered it when he took the house. She is a woman worth looking at. He looked at her for a moment. Then, she should be uncovered, he said, simply, as though it had never been in question. She left him at the gate and walked the lane back toward the house and did not let herself think about what kind of person said a thing like that until she was safely inside, where she could let the thinking be as complicated as it needed be without the inconvenience of an audience. The solicitor came on a Thursday, as arranged through the servants' entrance, which Mrs. Dent opened herself and which Sir Aldous therefore did not know about. His name was Mr. Carew, a quiet man in his 60s who carried 2 document cases and shook Verity's hand with both of his, which was not professional protocol and which told her something about what the Duke had said to him in advance. They sat in Mrs. Dent's private sitting room, which was small and warm, and entirely outside Sir Aldous' awareness, and Mr. Carew set both cases on the table and opened the one on the right first. He had found the original solicitor, the retired man in Bristol. He had spent 4 months finding him, and 2 more months, ensuring that the document he'd retained was intact and authenticated, and witnessed to a standard that would survive anything Sir Aldous' legal team could produce. He placed the original will on the table. Verity recognized her father's handwriting in the margins before she recognized anything else. That was what undid her slightly. Not the document, but the margins, the corrections and additions in his hand, the way he had written in the margins all his life, annotations in pencil on every book he read, notes to himself in the borders of letters, the handwriting of a man who had thoughts too quick to contain and had learned to write them wherever there was space. She put her fingertip on one of the margin notes and then lifted it. Tell me what it says, she said. Her voice was steady. She considered this an achievement, Mr. Carew told her. The trust, the property provision, the appointment of the Ashford family as her protectors, and at the end, in a section that was clearly her father's addition rather than the solicitor's draft, in language that had not been smoothed out because some things cannot be smoothed without being destroyed. Verity is not a settlement to be arranged. She is not a difficulty to be managed. She is the point of most of what I have done in this life, and she is to know it." She looked at the wall for a moment. She had not known those words existed. She had suspected in the way you suspect things about people who loved you, because love of that kind leaves evidence. But suspecting and reading were different. Reading was its own thing entirely. "The trust," she said. "Intact," Mr. Carew said. "Untouched. Your uncle didn't know it existed. Your father was very careful about that." "My mother's things?" She had not known whether to expect anything on that front, had not let herself. Mr. Carew opened the second case. There had been, her father had written, certain items of her mother's kept with the Ashford household for safekeeping. He produced a letter from the Duke confirming they were there. A room, locked, maintained. Verity held the letter and read it twice and set it down carefully. "What happens now?" she said. "Your uncle," Mr. Carew said, with the specific satisfaction of a man who has been waiting for this sentence, "will receive a formal notice by end of week. The original will supersede the document he submitted. The matter of its falsification is one for the appropriate authorities. That is a matter of weeks, not months." He squared his papers. "Your situation, the trust, the property, your standing, is addressable immediately. That is a matter of days." She looked at the two documents side by side on the table. "And the gallery," she said. Mr. Carew looked at her. "It will be unlocked," she said, "and the portraits will be uncovered." She said it the way you said things you had already decided. The way the Duke said things. Not a request. Mr. Carew said he would note that. She found the Duke in the East Garden an hour later. He was there, she thought, because he had known approximately how long the meeting would take and had made himself available at a reasonable distance without requiring her to look for him. She was beginning to understand how he operated. He arranged things at the correct proximity, and then stayed in them, and did not crowd the space. He looked up when she appeared. He waited. "Your solicitor is thorough," she said. "He is the best one I know," he said simply. She stood in the November garden with the cold air doing what cold air did, making everything feel more itself. She looked at the east wing of the house, at the covered windows of the gallery. She told him about the will. Not the document, he knew the shape of that already, but the margin notes. The specific sentence. The way her father's handwriting had looked in the borders of the pages, familiar and entirely itself. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. He knew what he was leaving, the Duke said. "Yes," she said, "he just couldn't know what would happen to it." Another pause. "It didn't disappear," he said. "It was only mislaid. There is a difference." She looked at him. He looked back. The November light was doing what November did, arriving honest and level, making no promises, lighting things exactly as they were. "Is there?" she said. He considered between misplaced and lost. "Yes. One has a location. One has only an absence." He looked at the gallery windows. "Yours had a location. I simply needed to find it." She looked at him. She had been looking at him and then looking away for 3 weeks, and she was tired of the looking away. He had earned the looking. "You spent 2 years on this," she said, "before you knew whether I existed." "I knew your father had a daughter," he said. "I knew she was owed something. Whether she was findable was a different question." He met her eyes without difficulty, with the steady attention she had gotten used to being the recipient of and had not yet gotten used to what it meant. "I prefer to answer the questions in order." She almost smiled. "That sounds like a principle." "Several," he said. She turned back to the house. Her house. In a week it would begin to be her house again, in the ways that mattered. In a year the legal situation would be fully resolved, the trust restored, the relevant parties reminded of what happened when documents were falsified, and heirlooms were locked away, and young women were sent to find other arrangements. She would be here for all of it. She had decided that, standing in the lane, in the dark, and she had not undecided it since. "There is something you don't know yet," she said. She had been deciding whether to tell him, and had decided because it was accurate, and he had given her enough accurate things that giving one back seemed right. "In my father's will," she said, "he named the Ashford family as my protectors. The current Duke, as the heir." He was quiet. "That would be me," he said, after a moment. "Yes." He absorbed that. She watched him do it, the careful, organized way he processed things, the way you could almost see it happening. "He wrote it that way," the Duke said. "Knowing your uncle was a possibility. He knew his brother," she said. "He trusted yours." Another silence, longer than the others. "I would have found you regardless," he said finally. "The provision doesn't change the—" He stopped. Restarted. "The provision is useful legally. I want that to be clear. What I was doing before I knew about it had nothing to do with it." She looked at him. He was looking at the garden, at the frost on the ground, at something she could not see. "I know," she said. "That's why I told you." He looked back at her. Something shifted in his expression, the composed attention she had learned, moving to something underneath it, something that had been there for some time and had not been named. She picked up her coat. "I should go in," she said. "There are things to begin." "Yes," he said. She was 3 steps away when he said her name. "Not Vera, Verity." She stopped. She turned. He was still standing in the garden, his hands in his coat pockets, the frost at his feet, the house behind him. He looked like someone who had decided something and was checking the decision one last time before it became permanent. "I would like to continue this," he said, "whatever this is. The inquiry is one part of it." He paused. "I'm asking about the rest." She looked at him for a long moment. The garden was very still. The oak in the far corner was exactly where it had always been, listing slightly toward the east, intact. "So would I," she said. He nodded once, the nod of a man who had expected an answer and is glad the answer was the one he expected. And she turned and went inside and stood in the entrance hall of her father's house and let the familiar smell of it, old wood and beeswax and the particular cold of stone floors in November, settle around her like something returning to its correct temperature. 6 months later, when the trust had been restored, and the legal proceedings had reached their unsurprising conclusion, and the gallery at Thornwell Hall had been unlocked, and her grandmother's portrait had been cleaned, and re-hung in the place it should have occupied all along, and the house had been, in every way that the law could measure, and several that it could not, returned to who it had always belonged to. Verity walked into the east garden on a morning in May, and found the Duke standing by the old oak. He had been coming to Thornwell Hall regularly since November. Not daily. They were not people who required daily, having both spent enough years understanding that the most important things did not announce themselves or demand constant attendance. He came on Wednesdays and sometimes Thursdays, and occasionally on Tuesdays for no particular reason that either of them stated. He had a way of being in a room that did not crowd it. She had decided, sometime in February, that she trusted his judgment almost as much as she trusted her own, which was the highest compliment she had ever paid anyone, and which she had not yet said out loud. She was working on it. "The oak," he said, without turning, "is doing better than I expected." "You were worried about it," she said. "The split on the south side." She came to stand beside him and looked at the tree. The split had been there as long as she could remember, a dark seam in the bark where the lightning had entered and been survived. "It was always going to be fine," she said. "You couldn't have known that." "No," she agreed. "But I did, anyway." He looked at her. She looked at the tree. The May morning was doing what May mornings did, being extravagant, with light in a way that November never was, as though compensating. He produced something from his coat pocket, a small case, old leather, worn at the corners. He held it without opening it. "This was your mother's," he said. "It was in the locked room. I thought it belonged here." She took it. Inside, on a square of faded velvet, was a ring. Not her father's signet ring. She had that back now, wore it again. the pale mark long since replaced by the real thing. This was her mother's. A pale stone in a simple setting, the kind of piece that had been worn daily rather than kept for occasions. There was also a note, folded small, in handwriting she didn't recognize. She unfolded it. "Give this to Verity when she is old enough to understand what it cost her mother to put it somewhere safe. It cost her everything she owned and nothing she valued." Edmund Ashcroft, 1891. Her father, writing about her mother, before she was born, leaving instructions she had only just received. She stood in the May garden and felt the specific grief and gratitude that occupied the same space in her chest and did not try to separate them, because they were the same thing, the cost of having been loved by people who had arranged the world as carefully as they could to go on loving her after they were gone. After a while, she folded the note and held the case and looked at the oak. "They did everything they could," she said. "Both of them." "Yes," he said. "And it worked, eventually." He was quiet for a moment, the preparatory silence. "You're here," he said. She looked at him. "I am," she said. He met her eyes. There was something in his expression she had been learning to read for 6 months. The thing underneath the careful attention, the thing that had been there since a November morning at a gate in a wall, and had not gone anywhere since, only become more legible over time. "Then it worked," he said. She put the case in her coat pocket where it would stay. She looked at the house, her father's house, her house now, the pale stone catching the morning light the way it always had, the windows open to May for the first time in 3 years. "Yes," she said, "it did."